Mary Magdalene's presence, arguments between the disciples, and mistakes made by Leonardo da Vinci. There are so many things we've all gotten wrong about the Last Supper. There are a number of common misconceptions about the Last Supper, and certainly basic facts are hard to come by. For example, while scholars are fairly certain the event took place in early April, it's a little harder to pin down the actual year it occurred, according to live science. It's believed that the Last Supper may have happened any time between 26 and 36 AD, based on the known tenure of Pontius Pilate as Roman procurator of Judea. There's also the question of where this most famous meal took place. Many Christians reportedly believe it took place at a holy site in Jerusalem called the Cenacle, above what's believed to be the burial place of King David. However, according to Bible History Daily, no concrete archaeological evidence has ever been found to back this up. 2,000 years later, everyone is still left wondering where it actually took place. Many people have also wondered whether the Last Supper was in fact a seder. As noted by Britannica, a seder is a religious meal served in Jewish homes on the 15th and 16th of the month of Nisan to commence the festival of Passover. Jesus and his followers had traveled to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. As Passover, Good Friday, and Easter are always close together on our modern calendars, it's entirely understandable why most people would assume that the Last Supper, often called the Lord's Supper, was a traditional Passover seder. It's more than likely, though, that the timing of the Last Supper ended up being a coincidental relative to the Passover, according to the Washington Post. While Passover was already observed at the time, its celebration usually involved little more than eating a single sacrificed lamb. The seder, such as it's known today, was unlikely to have been practiced at the time of Jesus' death. As a result, it's much more likely that the Last Supper was just a meal, the significance of which would come later and would resonate for Christians, not for practitioners of Judaism. In almost every depiction of the Lord's Supper, Christ and his followers are shown sitting around a large table as they eat their final favorite meal. But it's almost certain that a meal of this kind would not have been eaten at a table. According to live science, meals such as the Last Supper would have been eaten while seated on cushions on the floor. In Palestine and throughout much of the larger Roman world, meals would have been eaten this way at the time.
The food and setting would have been much different than what's depicted in the painting.
While it's possible there could have been a low table around which those assembled gathered, there certainly wouldn't have been a large piece of furniture surrounded by chairs or benches. Instead, participants would have been seated on a cushion or carpet on the floor. Plus, it's much more likely that each man would have sat on his own cushion and eaten off of stone plates. While paintings of the meal often depict a large wooden table complete with a tablecloth, this is likely inaccurate. Simply applying paint to a plaster wall does not make a fresco. As a result, Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper is no fresco at all. According to the art experts at My Modern Met, a true Bologna fresco involves the use of paints applied to wet plaster. This fresco painting technique ensures the lasting quality of the artwork as the paints seep into the wall material, bonding closely with the plaster. For The Last Supper, Da Vinci used the secco fresco method of painting, which involves painting with tempera paints onto dry plaster. The secco technique afforded Da Vinci two advantages. For one, he could work at his own pace on his own schedule, not harried by the drying plaster. Secondly, as the artist was not rushed by a drying wall, Da Vinci could carefully and masterfully apply the detail that sets his work apart. There is a common misconception that Mary Magdalene was present at the Last Supper. However, as far as we know, only Jesus and his 12 disciples attended the meal, and Mary Magdalene is not mentioned as being present per time. As for why so many people believe that Magdalene was at the Lord's Supper, the confusion actually appears to stem from Da Vinci's famous fresco. In Da Vinci's painting, the figure immediately at the right hand of Jesus is often thought to be a woman, with many believing the person to be Mary Magdalene specifically. But according to My Modern Met, the figure is in fact the Apostle John. Shown without a beard and the long hairstyle common for men at the time, this misinterpretation is understandable. But the figure is not Mary, or any other woman for that matter, as women weren't likely to be present at the gathering. When you visit the former convent Santa Maria della Grazia today and look up at the magisterial 29-foot wide, 15-foot tall painting of the Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci, you are not really looking at a painting by da Vinci at all. According to My Modern Met, that same secco fresco technique the master artist used that allowed him to take his time and apply his techniques also destined his painting for damage. This type of fresco painting is terribly delicate, and within less than 2 decades after the completion of the painting in 1498, pieces of paint were already flaking away and the quality of the image was failing. The Last Supper has undergone so many restorations over the years, it's not likely to feature more than a precious few of Da Vinci's original brushstrokes per the art newspaper. What we see today is the work of other artists doing their best not to undo the work of the Renaissance master, but not his own actual painting. Still, the composition, the perspective, the scale, and the spirit of the painting are all Da Vinci's, just not the actual top layer of paint. 27 books make up the New Testament of the Bible. The first 4 books are the Gospels, followed by the Acts of the Apostles, the letter of Paul to the Romans, and the first letter of Paul to the Corinthians. Given that the Gospels are positioned first in the New Testament, it makes sense to assume that they are the first source material we have on the Last Supper. But that's not the case. For Bible Gateway's text of the King James Bible, in 1 Corinthians 11 verses 23 through 26, Paul wrote, "The Lord Jesus, the same night in which he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he brake it, and said, 'Take, eat, this is my body, which is broken for you. This do in remembrance of me.' After the same manner also he took the cup, saying, 'This cup is the New Testament in my blood. This do ye, as oft as ye drink it, in remembrance of me.'" Interestingly, the first letter to the Corinthians was likely written in 53 or 54 AD per Britannica. Meanwhile, the first of the Gospels was reportedly written in the year 70 AD, almost 2 decades after Paul's letter to the Corinthians per PBS. There are 4 accepted Gospels in the Christian Bible, though others remain outside official church canon, such as the Gospel of Thomas, according to PBS Frontline. Given that the Bible includes the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, it's natural to assume they all contain similar details when it comes to the Last Supper. However, that's not the case. In fact, the books of Matthew, Mark, and Luke greatly differ from the Gospel of John when it comes to the Lord's Supper. One of the largest discrepancies between the Gospel of John and the other 3 Gospels is the very date of the Last Supper per Frontline. Whereas Matthew, Mark, and Luke place the meal during Passover, John places the Last Supper before the start of Passover, lending further credence to the unlikelihood of it having been a seder per the Washington Post. Furthermore, this places Jesus' execution on the same day lambs would have been slaughtered all around Jerusalem, which forces us to equate his crucifixion with the sacrifice of thousands of innocent animals. Hardly the staid, reverent occasion one might expect from having seen a communion ceremony performed in a church, the Last Supper was anything but a calm and peaceable affair. This can even be sourced right from the Holy Bible itself. In fact, the revered, seemingly blameless disciples at the dinner argued with one another over which of them was the greatest, according to Bible.org. Reading the Gospel of Luke in particular reveals how the dinner devolved into an argument, with one verse reading, "However, there also arose a heated dispute among them over which one of them was considered to be the greatest."
It begins with Jesus saying, "One of you shall betray me."
Even though Jesus had asked his disciples to stay up and remain vigilant while he went out into a garden near the room where they had all dined, his followers ended up falling asleep. As the Gospel of Luke says, when Jesus rose from prayer and went to the disciples, he found them slumbering, exhausted from grief. It's also possible that they were simply exhausted from heavy eating and drinking. Either way, Jesus remonstrates his disciples and tells them to wake up and keep praying, as the fateful hour is close at hand, making the Last Supper far from a reverent occasion. There is a common and potentially major misconception about the meaning of some of Christ's most famous words of all time, according to core Christianity. In the Gospel of Luke 22:19, Jesus is recorded as saying, "Do this in remembrance of me."
He and his disciples are breaking bread.
A casual reading of the biblical text or participation in a Eucharist ritual would make one think Jesus was telling his followers to break bread and drink wine to help them remember him. But it's unlikely that's what he meant, especially when you take into account the many instances in the Old Testament in which offerings and rituals and sacrifices were actually intended to help the faithful be remembered by their God. When Jesus tells his disciples to begin practicing the Eucharist, he's telling them to perform an act that will help them present themselves before God. Ultimately, it's a totally different message, and one that makes a lot of sense. A mere mortal human needs to put in the effort to show themselves worthy and faithful before God. If blowing trumpets and making burnt offerings was the go-to pre-Jesus, bread and wine are the New World Order.
Would the disciples have recognized its importance at the time?
If you close your eyes and picture a painting of the Last Supper, it's likely that you'll be seeing Leonardo da Vinci's fresco, painted in the late 1490s in the Santa Maria della Grazia convent. But Da Vinci's Last Supper rendition was hardly the first or the last major work to capture this major event. For instance, Giotto painted a Last Supper scene in the early 14th century, likely in 1304 or 1305 according to the history of art. His painting, which predates Da Vinci's by nearly 200 years, depicts the 12 apostles and Jesus around a table without any food visible. Approximately 650 years later, Salvador Dali painted an ethereal, haunting take of the scene titled The Sacrament of the Last Supper. His 1955 work of Oil on Canvas depicts a simple table with only wine and bread served and a figure floating above the scene, arms outstretched, calling to mind the coming crucifixion. Alongside Giotto and Dali, there are plenty of other notable works depicting the scene, but Da Vinci's remains the most recognized.